What's up, everyone? It's Dakota, and welcome back to another Pioneer video. And it's no surprise, or at least it shouldn't be a surprise, between the US regionals and just all the other kind of Pioneer events that we've had kind of starting to stack up, that Rakdos is probably the best two-color combination. We've seen the Rakdos Cauldron deck be a big surprise in the US regionals and end up winning the US regionals. We've seen Rakdos Aggro be one of the most played decks in the format in terms of paper and online results. And now we kind of visit a third Rakdos archetype that kind of toes the line. I wouldn't even say necessarily being an aggro deck or a combo deck, but it's like this weird like value-y, like plays like a mid-range deck that just has a big grand finish, if you will, from what it's trying to set up. But of course, before we get too deep into the Rakdos Transmogrify deck, if you're already subscribed to the channel and you want to see more videos from me, where I post mainly about the Modern and Pioneer formats, as well as doing some other longer form videos. So if any of that interests you, please consider subscribing and ringing the notification bell so you know when those videos get posted. And if you want to support my content even further, I have a link in the description down below to my Discord server. You can go ahead, follow that link. Feel free to join over there and come and hang out with us. We're slowly growing our Discord over there, and I'm trying to post a little bit more often over there than I normally do, and reply to the people I can. So if that is something that interests you, you can go ahead and follow that link there. There's a link to this deck list, so if you're interested in playing it as well, you can kind of just go to this, download it, whatever, and do what you need to do to make sure you can get it. And if you don't have the means necessarily to rent this deck or play it, whatever the case may be, then you're in luck, because the sponsor of this channel, Mana Traders, is giving me a link, or a special kind of code that you can use. Follow the link in the description and you'll be able to sign up for a Mana Traders account, where you can get 5% off of your monthly subscription. And there's a bunch of benefits that come with being a part of like the Mana Traders, or having a Mana Traders account. One is getting to participate in a free monthly tournament. You can go and qualify for the tournament through their qualifier rounds. If you meet certain thresholds, you can end up actually getting into the Swiss rounds that take place over the course of 2 weekends, one being the actual Swiss rounds and then Sunday being the top 8, where you can win prizes as well to actually kind of show for something and go infinite, as it were, with your Mana Traders account. On top of that, there's also near instant trading, where as soon as you say that you're going to rent a deck and you follow all the prompts and everything, you're essentially going to get a trade request from a Mana Traders bot like near instantly. It's so neat, and there's been a lot of upgrades that have kind of taken place over the few years that I've had my own Mana Traders account, and I can't recommend them enough if you're going to use a service to rent cards from. So if that is something that interests you and you want to kind of play some of the decks that we check out here on the channel, go ahead, follow my link in the description down below, sign up for Mana Traders today. And with all that said, let's go ahead and talk about this Rakdos Transmogrify deck. So Transmogrify is essentially like the card that we would see in some of the creativity decks, that it would be different from creativity, but would essentially accomplish the same goal. So Transmogrify, for a red and 3, you exile target creature, and that creature's controller reveals cards from the top of their library until they reveal a creature card. That player puts that card onto the battlefield and shuffles the rest of their library. So with Transmogrify, obviously we're not using this as like a way to get rid of our opponent's big creature and hope they spin into a small creature. We want to get rid of one of our own creatures and put something into play. And that something into play is Atraxa Grand Unifier. This is kind of what people default to as currently one of the best like reanimator targets / cheat this creature into play targets, especially for Pioneer, and something that we see, in Legacy quite a bit as like a reanimator target. So for 7 mana, you get a 7/7 Flying Vigilance, Death Touch, Lifelink. And when it enters the battlefield, you reveal the top 10 cards of your library, and for each card type, you may put a card of that type from the revealed cards into your hand. You put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So this is artifact, creature, planeswalker, battle, land, so on and so forth. So with this Atraxa, we're going to be able to essentially get, refill our hand with relevant spells to hopefully be able to close out the game. And with a 7/7 lifelink, even some of the Rakdos aggro decks, if they don't have like their extremely fast kills, they could potentially play through an Atraxa, but it is very, very hard for them to do so, especially since we're playing the, sweet interactive package of the Rakdos deck, and 4 Fatal Push and 4 Thoughtseize, and to boot 2 more Duress in the main deck, as well as having Torch the Tower, Bitter Triumph, Sheoldred's Edict as as additional removal options in this deck. So if you've kind of been paying attention to what's going on here, obviously Transmogrify needs a creature to exile for us to get an Atraxa, and we only have 2 creatures and they're both Atraxa. So how the heck are we doing this? Well, it's a good thing that they have this convenient thing called the Companion, because then we have access to Shingatha, which means that we're going to play. No, I'm kidding. That is way too slow. 3 mana to get a Shingatha and then 5 to play it and then have to have it live is obviously not ideal for this deck. But, something that you could technically do if you are that desperate in particular. But there's some better options for it. Obviously, one of them being Case of the Stashed Skeleton. So for 2 mana, this makes a 2/1 black skeleton creature token, and you suspect it, which means that it has menace and it can't be blocked. To solve it, if you control no suspected skeletons. So for one thing, with the different cards that you have going on here, obviously getting to Transmogrify the skeleton will solve kind of like 2 problems. One, it will solve the case technically at the beginning of your end step, and then also allow you to go get an Atraxa as well with the thanks to the Transmogrify. So, I mean, that's pretty neat there. You can also then sacrifice a skeleton to something like a Torch the Tower, for its bargain cost, to where you can solve the case and then also use Torch the Tower to end up dealing with a slightly bigger threat and exiling it as well. So pretty neat there. In all honesty, you also have Fable the Mirrorbreaker, this being probably the most famous of the enchantments that make creatures, being the fact that for 3 mana you make a 2/2 Goblin Shaman that will create a treasure token when it attacks. You can discard up to 2 cards and then draw that many cards, and then of course the backside of it, getting to make a token that's a copy of another target non-legendary creature you control, except it has haste. You sacrifice at the beginning of the next end step. Obviously not super amazing when you have things like Vessel the All-Consuming would be the things that you could copy, and other Fables, which of course doing the Fable trick of having 2 of them flipped and just being able to copy a bunch of them, and then you're able to make a bunch of copies of something else, or even just attack with the said copies that you made, is technically something that you can do. Getting to do it with like Case of the Stashed Skeleton is pretty cool, because then you just get a bunch of like 2/1 menace threats, which are slightly better than the flipped Fables. For the fact that your opponent needs like 2 creatures instead of 1. Just something, essentially rambling at this point. But, essentially this is where this deck kind of sits, where it's going to play this kind of interactive-y game plan early, with access to 4 Thoughtseize, 2 Duress, and like the Fatal Pushes, and Torch of Towers being like these turn 1 plays that you can make. Bankbuster allows you to play a little bit of a grindier game as well. Again, we are playing, the playset of Thoughtseize, Fatal Push. We're playing Duress, Torch Tower, and all these other, removal type effects. So Bankbuster kind of allows us to play more in this, like Rakdos kind of mid-range game plan, where we can play like a Bankbuster, or we can have lines where we like Thoughtseize on turn 1, we play like a Case of the Stashed Skeleton on turn 2, we can play an Obnixilis on turn 3, and we end up having 2 Obnixilis Planeswalkers in play, while simultaneously solving the case at the beginning of our end step, or just playing a Fable on turn 3. Whatever the case may be, there's definitely plenty of routes that we can take, aside from playing like just transmogrifying one of our tokens into an Atraxa. And I think that's a lot of where this deck gets a lot of its power from, is the fact that you have these different ways of making tokens, and then you have like this big grand reveal of like, here's an Atraxa, I'm going to end up drawing 3 to 5 cards, we'll say, putting them into our hand, and our opponent is going to have some very specific answers to an Atraxa. Obviously, the Children's Edict is going to be a pretty easy one, because we don't really have any other like non-token creatures that we're playing that, Atraxa would be protected from in terms of like a Children's Edict. Decks are playing Bitter Triumph, but with the consensus being a lot of people playing like Torch the Tower and Fatal Push as the removal, and we're seeing like maybe like 1 or 2 copies of a card that could potentially deal with an Atraxa, it essentially makes this card very unkillable. And while I prefer the Valgavoth versions, just because it's a bigger thing, it doesn't play offense and defense very well, but when your opponent is having to play cards into Valgavoth and they're not going to be able to get it off the board, a lot of the time I feel like gaining 9 life, outside of like a few scenarios where you would need to gain necessarily 14 in 1 turn, thanks to maybe your aggro opponent. I think that Valgavoth is really neat, but Atraxa does get the job done here. Looking at the mana base too, you do have some other ways of making tokens or having creatures to end up actually going and getting Atraxa. So we have like the Fountain Port, which has been kind of a card that a lot of people have been gravitating towards, and it just does a lot. You know, you can pay 2 and sacrifice a token to draw a card. You can pay 3 and pay a life to make a fish, which allows us to gives us a Transmogrify target to then go get Atraxa. Or you can pay 4 and create a treasure token. You can kind of like bank up some treasure tokens to where you could eventually just cast an Atraxa if it's just sitting in your hand. So something to kind of think about. Sokenzen also making tokens, you know, 4 mana, make 2 2/2s, allows you to be kind of aggressive as well if you need to be. Maybe not necessarily in that way, but you can. You know, that is definitely a mode of this card. 2 Mutavaults as well, just as like a way that you can like tap to like activate this, you know, using the mana from itself, and then using your other 4 mana to Transmogrify the Mutavault into an Atraxa is a pretty neat plan there as well. Aside from that, you know, you're playing 4 Cliffs, 3 Blightstep Pathways, playing 4 Haunted Ridge, and wow, and 4 Blood Crypt. That's it. Yep, found it. Sideboard, looking at 2 Duress, 1 Abrade, a Damping Sphere, 2 Unlicensed Hearse, 2 Goldblink, 2 Hetsuku Consumes All, which we do have 1 in the main here as a way to deal with permanents mana value 1 or less. It's pretty good against the Jund Sacrifice deck because you're going to be able to kill all of their tokens that they made, get rid of their cats, their ovens, and their Scavenger's Talent as well, which is very important. And then getting to exile all graveyards, you're essentially having to rebuild from a lot of devastation from their board, and chances are they're not going to be able to get everything that they wanted that's in their graveyard out of their graveyard in time by the time this goes off. And of course, your flip side, you have a win condition there as well. Another Ob Nixilis, the Adversary. I think that this card has been super awesome, especially when you compare it with an Urbrask Forge. This allows you to be pretty aggressive. Also, again, give you tokens that you can just sacrifice to Transmogrify, sacrifice to Ob Nixilises to make increasing sized Ob Nixilises to then, you know, again, put pressure on your opponent's hand and eventually the life total. Station Event as well is just a good one-off in the sideboard as well. And that's the Rakdos Transmogrify deck for the Pioneer format. I think that this is in an interesting spot. So you essentially, with a lot of these Rakdos decks, you know, when we look at, you know, something like Jund Sacrifice, which is mostly red-black in a lot of cases, when you have the Rakdos Cauldron decks, you have this Transmogrify deck, you have like the aggro deck, where they kind of can play this sort of mid-game, and obviously varying results for some of them, where the aggro deck doesn't necessarily want to play a mid-game kind of game and wants to end the game on turn 3, turn 4. Rakdos Transmogrify can do it pretty decently here, just with all the different disruption spells that it's playing, between the removal, between the discard spells, being able to play Bank Buster, which is also going to kind of give you some incremental value where it's going to eventually make a token. It's a creature that you can then crew and attack with. Case of the Stash Skeleton allows you to have a Demonic Tutor, where essentially it's going to add the cost of 2 mana to any one thing if you want to play it that turn, or just something that you can kind of sink your mana into to, again, kind of set up for, you know, a win on the next turn, or rather a way to kind of set up your combo for the next turn. So it's a deck that has a lot of interesting things going on. I really do enjoy this Transmogrify deck. It's the deck that I've been playing outside of, you know, the Jund Food deck, and I really like this. I don't know if Atraxa is necessarily the very best creature to get. I mean, it's hard to argue that Atraxa is probably like top 2, and she's probably not 2. But, you know, again, I've been enjoying kind of the Valgavoth versions of this. So I guess depending on how popular the, you know, the Rakdos aggro decks are, and maybe even some of the aggro decks going forward, Atraxa might be a little bit better for the fact that you're going to be able to find, you know, fatal pushes and other different types of removal for those creatures, and it might be more beneficial than, you know, the extra 2 points of power and toughness, you know, and the potential extra 2 life that you would be able to gain on like a certain turn. But I think if aggro decks become less of a thing, I think that you would want to probably turn to Valgavoth in most cases, because it's basically a creature that's never going to be taken off the battlefield, even if your opponent is able to assemble, you know, an actual removal spell that can kill it. So I guess aside from a Shielder's Edict, which might also be a reason why we could see Shielder's Edict, because it does get around Valgavoth's insane ward cost. But that's gonna do it for me in this video. Hope you all enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like on the video. Comment down below what Pioneer videos you would like to see next. Of course, you know, if you stay subscribed and everything like that, you will see some of the new videos coming out. We're hoping to do like 4 or 5 videos this week, so we'll see how that ends up going. But that's going to do it for me this video. Hope you all enjoyed it. I hope to see you all in the next one.